I actually really love the end of an FF14 expansion, not just because you get to reflect on what's come before, but because you get to look forward and get excited about what's to come. We're in the season of prediction, of anticipation. There aren't just 2 new jobs and a whole new section of Eorzea to explore coming soon. Every single current job in the game is going to be receiving updates and changes. Things will be a little different. For me, that's one of the most exciting parts. I can tell you right now that I'm legitimately more enthused at the idea of seeing what changes they've made to my main jobs like Scholar and White Mage than I am to get my hands on Viper and Pictomancer. I'm that hyped. Discussion around the directions our favourite jobs will be taking absolutely fuels me, and in this period I usually consume as much of it as I possibly can. This video is sponsored by Opera GX. Opera GX is the web browser built from the ground up with gamers in mind. So I actually installed the browser whilst making this video and I needed to collect some POVs for it, and thanks to the video pop-out feature it was insanely easy to script and check POVs at the exact same time. At the press of a button you can pop out videos into a floating adjustable frame and then browse on another tab entirely. The browser is also completely customizable due to GX mods. Want to change every push of your keyboard or new tab to the sound of an incoming tell in FF14 to give yourself an aneurysm? Go ahead. For me though, I grabbed the lo-fi mod which adjusts background music while typing, adding satisfying clicks and clacks, a new dedicated wallpaper, theme, and even a shader to really set the mood. All of this is modular too, so if you want everything except the shader, that customization is just one click away. When you're browsing, you can also have Opera GX summarize the articles for you to save time, including finding related content, translating foreign languages, and more. And this instantly boosted my productivity tenfold. And you can even make it give you notifications when I go live on Twitch so that this time you show up. Make sure to download Opera GX today using my link. Thanks to the quick import tool, you can be up and running in just a few moments. Thank you so much once again for sponsoring this video. So today, I asked some of the best and most knowledgeable caster players in the entire world just that. I asked them how they feel about the current position of their favourite role, the direction they're expecting Dawntrail to take, and how they anticipate the introduction of Pictomancer to shake things up for the coming years. The first caster featured in today's episode is Exu, the group leader of Sleepocat and a Black Mage specialist. Exu has accolades as both a top speedrunner and a veteran of hardcore progression, and he offers in-depth analysis of his favourite job on his stream and YouTube channel. Wonderful is a party finder demon and world progression raider, capped off by his world 13th clear of Anabasios, the most recent Savage tier. He's also a recent Twitch partner, so massive congratulations to him for that. Sphere has had more world first finishes in FF14 than I've had a flat as misery direct hit crits ever. It's a problem. Competing at the top of FF14's progression scene since Heavensward, there are not many players that can claim to have more experience than he does. Peridot is the caster player for prolific progression group Kindred, which you might recognise from my retrospective on the Omega Protocol as the stream first group to clear the ultimate. If you follow raiding more closely, you'll know that he's a fierce caster player with an ever-growing count of accolades. I think they'll know what they're talking about, and I'm excited to look into their answers and discussions alongside you guys. The first thing I asked them was how they felt about the caster role as it stands right now. Endwalker has been somewhat tumultuous for casters, with Summoner being reworked into a pseudo-physical ranged, Red Mage often lagging behind a little in terms of balance compared to the others, despite being in a better spot than ever playability-wise, and Black Mage continuing to be, well, you either love it or you can't play it. I was very curious to see how those that are a lot more in tune with the role than I am felt about it all.
I think casters are in a really difficult spot in Endwalker due to the imbalance between each job, as most people know.
Overall, I think casters right now are not very balanced. Now, of course I'm speaking from the perspective of a high-end raider who does mainly speedrunning Savage content as well as world progression of Savage and Ultimates. In progression environments, res casters are king. Summoner and Red Mage are shoo-ins for the caster spot, given how much more leeway you have as a group with mechanics, having extra combat resurrections. Heck, many top world prog teams even take both Summoner and Red Mage for the first few Savage floors just for the extra redundancy.
So my overall opinion on the caster role is that The existence of battle res creates a really huge divide in the overall landscape. Much like healers were split officially into pure and shield healers, I feel like casters are kind of heading in this direction too.
Fortunately in this game, there are rarely DPS checks that really make it a problem, but doing Abyssos and top on release, the caster balance was really noticeable. I'd planned to go Red Mage in Prague for the utility and the res, but it became apparent by the last floor P8S door that Black Mage basically required in my group. I'd at least practiced and played the job off and on for a long time, so it wasn't a difficult switch, but in a game that usually promotes playing any job to clear anything, it did kind of strike me as a defining moment of balance. Had I not been prepared with Black Mage, I don't think my group would have made that check week 1, especially because we had 2 physical range. I personally don't mind having to be flexible for Prague in endgame rating, but it's never felt like the direction this game usually goes toward.
And I hope going forward that we get to see more unique utility from the individual jobs, which each get properly rewarded by the content in Dawntrail without being tied down by the power budget given to battle res.
Where Black Mage shines is in its damage output. The damage disparity between casters is at an all-time high in Endwalker, with Black Mage usually doing close to 1000 RDPS more than Summoner or Red Mage in most fights in the Savage tier. If your group is facing DPS checks and enraging, swapping to Black Mage might be the play. From a damage perspective, there is a huge imbalance, so in content where damage actually matters, like speedrunning, or when you're facing enrage scenarios, you really want the higher damage caster.
I think casters are in an overall good spot. They're not as strong as they were in Shadowbringers, and they're not as weak as they were at the start of Endwalker. I think the role is easy to get into, but arguably the hardest to master out of the DPS roles in a progression setting, so there's definitely value in picking up the role. Aesthetics-wise, you have some of the sickest designs out of the whole job roster, and it's definitely satisfying to watch some fireworks as you do your rotation.
I was also able to prog top on Black Mage doing it blind, and as brought up recently in the caster talk Frosty hosted, doing damage in the last phase, phase 6, is no easy feat as well. I can definitely see why they buffed the job to keep it in line with other casters, quote unquote, but they definitely went about it in the wrong way with just buffing Xeno, and the balance just feels way off again for almost all other content, even the fight it was buffed for, which is top, it seemed. I do love the skill expression on the job, and I don't want to lose it, but it's always going to be a difficult balancing act.
And with current fight design, there are more and more body check mechanics happening. Think of things like P9S rock breakers and elements, P10S bonds, P11S proteans, P12S with super chain theories. Basically, if one person dies, usually one or more people die as a consequence. At that point, does having Varese actually help you? In blind progression, where you're just trying to see mechanics, yeah, for sure. And in ultimate fights, there's very few places that raises even help. Top phase 6 comes to mind, where one death is basically just the end of the run. At some point, people just kind of have to get good and do the mechanic properly. And having extra damage can really help you in a pinch, as it gives your team more leeway in meeting DPS checks, or maybe skipping parts of mechanics near the end of a fight.
I then inquired about the upcoming 4th caster, Pictomancer. It's impossible to say right now exactly how it will play, but it's still very fun to theorize, I think.
After seeing the monk rework, I'm imagining something similar to Perfect Balance or a Mudra system where you have different combos of colors like paint that lead to different casts or finishers or buffs.
I'm a fan of damage over time spells, so I hope that Pictomancer has some, but given that Summoner got all of their damage over time spells axed in Endwalker, I'm not super confident that we'll see any on Pictomancer.
More than anything, I hope Pictomancer is fun and unique. After some of the more recent additions or changes to jobs in the game, I'm a little worried about how on the rails or watered down the job might feel to actually play. But it has a really fun theme, so I think it will probably find popularity regardless of its actual playstyle and function.
Pictomancer not having a resurrection ability also puts it in the same boat as Black Mage. We'll essentially have 2 groups of casters in Dawntrail, casters that can resurrect and casters that can't. One group will be preferred for prog and party finders, and the other one won't. I also hope Pictomancer has a high skill ceiling. A lot of people, myself included, think Summoner was extremely oversimplified going from Shadowbringers to Endwalker, becoming easily one of the easiest jobs to play in the game. I'd like Pictomancer to have more hard casts, less instant casts, and have optimization potential like Black Mage does with rotational creativity and less being locked into a certain rotation path.
I hope it's a lot of actual hard casting and movement planning similar to Black Mage, but I'm pretty biased in that. I do like my casters to be casters.
Caster arguably has the highest skill ceiling of an FF14 role in Black Mage and the lowest skill floor in Summoner. And that could be seen as a very good thing or a very bad thing depending on your stance. I asked our casters about this and how they feel about the difficulty disparity between the jobs. As an aside, there is definitely an interesting conversation to be had about whether job difficulty should be factored into job balance, or if that's an unhealthy environment to create. There's also the advent of beginner jobs in FF14, like current Summoner as a peak example, and whether that's an intentional design choice or if it's just a side product of overall simplification. And I think that's something I'd absolutely love to pick the brains of the job design team about if I ever got the opportunity.
I think it's okay for the role to have such a drastic difference between skill floors and skill ceilings of the jobs. While I love to optimize Black Mage and always feel like I have something to improve on when I play it, there's a kind of tranquility I get playing Summoner and how brain empty it is. I also think that this difference in skill requirements adds an interesting progression for someone who wants to stay in the caster role and wants to start with a simpler job and then advance to a job where it feels like they're making important decisions about their kit and are being rewarded for it.
While I personally like the high skill ceiling of Black Mage, I'm not positive it's going to stay around, or even healthy design. Because of how unique Black Mage's playstyle and damage profile is, it feels like it's often at odds with the rest of the jobs in the game. They all get to play Final Fantasy XIV, while you get to play Black Mage.
I just don't see Square Enix changing how Summoner plays out. With the PAX panel, it sounds like they're just going to build on the jobs as they are now, and Summoner may probably just stay as the easy-to-play caster and job in general.
While it would never be fair to have them competitive damage in their current state, it does make it awkward that they're in the same role. I do like the accessibility of the job, even if I don't play it. It might be too far in the ease of use category, but I don't mind having some more difficult and some easier jobs in the same role. For example, a huge benefit for me on Black Mage is that you can play almost any content in standard speeds and do fairly well, but also has a high ceiling for skill expression in later re-clears and other content, allowing you to optimize as much as you would like and keeps the job fun and fresh in everything. I feel like Summoner would really benefit from even just a small portion of this.
I honestly doubt that this paradigm will shift drastically in Dawntrail, but I would definitely appreciate a little bit more meat to Summoner's kit, where it feels like the class isn't just playing itself. I'd also like to see a small bump up in complexity or difficulty for Red Mage, and I hope that Pictomancer lies in a similar place as Red Mage.
We've seen comments from Yoshida himself talking about streamlining fight design to not hurt individual jobs more than others in the past, and unless more jobs get to truly feel as unique as Black Mage, it feels like the ugly duckling issue will still continue. Conversely, I think Summoner creates a really large balancing issue with how overly simple it is. The developers have talked about how job difficulty is factored into their performance, which is something I agree with, but having things so opposed within the role makes balancing more difficult in my opinion. Why would I play Black Mage in Prog when Summoner can do a trivial amount less damage, provide significantly better utility, and optimize that damage to a clearable level in a fraction of the time? Do I think this paradigm is likely to change though? Unlikely, but much like everything else in the game, I do expect the outer limits of skill requirements to be brought a little closer to each other, most likely from both ends.
As a Black Mage main though, I definitely hope that they keep the complexity and freedom Black Mage has with its rotations. Being able to create custom rotations for a fight, and not be locked into a certain pattern or routine is definitely what gets me excited about the job. Black Mage is definitely disproportionately more difficult than the other two casters, so I think when Pictomancer is released, we will see a job that is easier than Black Mage, but probably harder than Summoner and Red Mage.
This one's a bit of a fun one, and it's for you, the viewer, as well. If you could add one new ability to each of the current casters at level 100, what would it be? If you could remove or change one ability for each as well, what would you choose to do?
Black Mage already feels so solid, same with Red Mage. I could see them at most adding another strong spell, like Ultima could be cool, but I already picture it being a 2 polyglot spender, like Double Down, so I already hate the thought. Red Mage, just please not another melee combo finisher.
My hope for Black Mage has always been something similar to how the Logos Action Magic Burst worked. A cooldown or triggered phase where you increase MP consumed and maybe even cast times to also increase damage. Rotational options is why this job is so fun, so I'd like to play more into that. As for changes to existing skills, Mana Font should function like XCOG. Hitting 0 MP automatically instantly recovers MP. This will fix alignment and usability issues. Also make Leylands give a 5 to 6 second lingering buff.
Endwalker Black Mage almost feels like the perfect class now. The rotation feels really intuitive, and it has a lot of tools to deal with some of their key weaknesses. A new ability I'd be excited to see though would be a one-time repositioning of your ley lines after they're already active. And it'd be a massive quality of life boost to Black Mage, although I hope it doesn't end up making the class too easy. I think the only piece of Black Mage that would change is the cooldown of ley lines, since I really like the 90-second cooldown it had before Endwalker.
For Black Mage, many people would add something like Ultima, which uses 2 or even 3 polyglot stacks if we get a third one. I think for lore reasons that's not going to happen, but one thing I'd like to see Black Mage have is some sort of self-steroid buff that would grant them a more powerful Astral Fire phase with higher multipliers on their fire spells. In terms of changing existing things though, I would really like them to move Umbral Soul to earlier levels so that it's usable in level 70 ultimates, and this would make Black Mage so much more fun to play in Uwu and Yukab.
Summoner just needs more options and more interaction between the buttons. Give us more summons than we have time to use in between the 1-minute bursts. There will always be an optimal set of summons to use. However, having more options means fight by fight your rotation will change, and maybe even group by group depending on phasing. As for a change to an existing button, maybe some cast times on the caster DPS might help the overall feel. Just a thought.
Summoner really does just feel like you're playing a Fizz range right now, so what I'd really like in a new ability is an impactful hardcast GCD that would help Summoner feel a little bit more like a caster. Maybe bring dots back? Those were pretty cool, although I understand that Square has been cutting down on dots, so that's probably not going to happen. In terms of what I'd change, I'd really just like something to spice up Summoner, either in the rotation or as part of their utility. For example, I really like the pseudo XCOG that's part of Phoenix now, so wouldn't it be cool if you could like Radiant Aegis your party members as well? Although, if you could do that, maybe make it a little bit weaker.
Summoner, however, I'd love for them to do something like I heard Sphia mention in the recent caster talk, and say rather than one ability change, I'd love for them to flesh out the job with more options, like say more casts per summon than you can finish, allowing some choices between which ones are more damage and mobility. Allows the job to be still very accessible and mobile, but also have some times where it would be a small gain to plan ahead and give yourself time to hard cast and finish more of the higher potency skills of each summon. It would give the job some skill expression similar to other casters in planning movement, but also very mobile and accessible.
One idea they could implement though is more primals you can summon, like Shiva, Leviathan, and Ramu, or more actions that you can complete with each primal summon, like having Enkindles for each of them. For Red Mage, honestly anything except another finisher to the melee combo. I think a powerful dot would be a cool thing to add. But besides that, one thing I think would be interesting for Red Mage is a damage stance and a support stance, similar to the Black Shift and White Shift that they have going on in PvP. It could be a stance that you activate pre-pull and you can't change, meaning you could be in White Shift mode for progression purposes, which allows you to resurrect, but might not grant you as much damage, versus a Black Shift mode, which would be optimal for meeting DPS checks and in rage scenarios.
I think the last couple of expansions not really giving too much rotationally outside of extra finishes has hurt my enjoyment of the job, so I'd like to see things outside of the burst window. It already is a proc-based job, so doubling down on that could make sense. I do have a change I'd like to see though, putting Black and White Shift into PvE, and tying the ability to raise to White Shift, and more damage on Black Shift.
Natural progression of new abilities for Red Mage would be another combo GCD after Resolution. I really think that this is probably the most boring thing that you could think of for a new ability for Red Mage. The only way I'd be okay with this is if they made all of their combo finisher GCDs faster. I think machine gunning all of your big spells on Red Mage would feel really cool. I think anything that would get Red Mage and melee range of the boss more often would also be a neat way to make the class feel more exciting. So maybe have Flesh and Contra 6 have a stronger payoff, but you'd have to be in melee range to use it.
Lastly is a topic that I think is a bit of a hot debate at the moment. What do they think is going to happen to combat reses in Dawntrail?
I really hope that they get thrown out the window so that Red Mage and Summoner can get more interesting kits and all of their power budget isn't just spent on their ability to res. Realistically though, it would be a pretty big identity change for the role, and seeing how safe that they played the job changes from Shadowbringers to Endwalker, combat reses for casters will probably be here to stay.
I personally expect minimal to no changes for now. It does give me hope that they've at least brought up removing Summoner's Resurrection. I really would like to see something similar, maybe not exactly to the Criterion resing system with some tweaks. Limiting caster Resurrection to, like, say a cooldown or a certain amount, but healers having full flexibility, unlimited res, would be something that might allow them to balance caster around something other than a support role.
I think combat res is likely to stay the same going forward. I do think it's actually a cool dichotomy to have, but the current gearing systems and fight design don't properly reward it, so changes in these areas could be great ways to bridge the rift that battle res creates.
For combat reses, I think they're here to stay. I mean, they can always change things later up, and maybe they will tell us more in one of the coming live letters, but combat res is kind of iconic, and I do think it will exist in some fashion. Perhaps they will finally remove it from Summoner and Dawntrail, allowing them to actually buff the job a bit more in terms of damage output, given that Summoner and Red Mage are actively kept lower on the DPS ladder due to having strong support capabilities. But I still think it will stay in some capacity. A lot of the Red Mage fantasy, after all, is to chain resurrect with dual cast and swift cast, but to some people this amount of cheesing is both satisfying and kind of sad that it can happen and you can still clear fights. I could see them implementing longer cooldowns or charges on Resurrection in order to hamper the importance of combat res in general.
So I hope this video was interesting to you on the whole. One thing I'm really curious about is this. If you could ask a question to one of the best players in the world about their role, what would it be? Please let me know in the comments because I'm in the process of making these videos for every role in the game. And there's a chance that your question might be included in a future video. Yoinkers! Thank you so much for watching. And once again, thank you so much to Exosphere, Wonderful, and Perry for participating. I've put all of their Twitch streams in the description, and you should absolutely check them out if you want to see the best of caster gameplay come Dawntrail. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.